Today we're going to talk about the #1 very best free-to-play flagship combo that you can use pretty much anywhere in Infinite Galaxy. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and in this video sponsored by the makers of Infinite Galaxy, I want to talk about the very best free-to-play flagship pairing, the best primary and auxiliary flagships that you can possibly muster if you're free to play. And for this video, we're going to be looking exclusively at the epic tier flagships. And I obviously am not a free to play player with the flagships I've got at the ranks that I've got them at. But I want to just walk through, like, what would I do if I was going 100% free to play? And what would I advise the people in my own alliance? And that is my main attachment to this being very accurate and valuable information, because I want to make sure I'm giving good advice to the members of my alliance and my nebula. Now, I also, by the way, ran this by and had a good conversation with the last Spartan, who's another big whale in my nebula, to talk about whether or not this is the right combo, and we both aligned in the same place. Now, it was not a coincidence at the start of this video that I had the Orion up on the screen. And there's a couple things that we're looking for in a great free-to-play flagship pair. We're talking about really effective, both in PvE and PvP. I want it to be really good in the battles versus other players. That includes when you're running around in your own nebula. That includes when they have server versus server. That absolutely includes the Galaxy Summit event. So I want to make sure that you've got a fleet that's really good for everything. And I know that's a bit of a stretch because to some extent, specialization is how you get extra value in this game. In fact, I am going to advise some specialization into one warship type, which is going to have advantages when you go to your crew formations and you're picking your crew with your spaceport points. Heck, even with your core module, you get a lot of advantage from potentially having a single unit focus. And there is going to be a single unit focus for you. In my opinion, this is the best way to go for free to play. Again, not a coincidence. The Orion was up on the screen. Frigates are amazing. They are, first of all, the fastest unit you can possibly muster, and the Orion makes them go even faster. I love this about frigates. Now, not only is the Orion a fantastic flagship, in fact, you'll notice that when you get a look at the flagships, that the ones that focus on a specific unit type, whether it's the frigate, the destroyer, or the cruiser, generally give you a disproportionately high amount of stats. So I knew that when we were going to make this recommendation of, like, what should you do, that I was going to recommend either the Orion, the Radamanthus, or I was going to recommend the Brontes, right? These are the epic tier flagships that are focused on the one unit types. But there's a reason that I am recommending to you the Orion. And that reason is just actually very straightforward. The Orion is obviously not only strong, frigates are not only fantastic, but if you go to the campaign and you go to the shop, the Orion is one of the flagships that you can get a ton of blueprints for, easy peasy, right over here for free. Now, that is driving the decision in part. If they had the Radamanthus in here, then I would consider the Radamanthus. If they had the Brontes in here all the time, I would consider the Brontes. But the presence of the Orion, whenever you want it, at a price that's reasonable from the campaign shop for free, is really, really strong and compelling. Now, that means, by the way, that you have one other flagship that you can use all of your Federation credits for in the blueprint exchange. So that's the other reason I really like this strategy, is you're going to use all of your campaign medals to go and max out the Orion, and then you can use all of your Federation credits to go get one other flagship of your choice. And again, for this video, we're looking at a 2 epic pair, but I'll give you some upgrade paths as well. So the second flagship that I would recommend, that I think is a really great choice to pair with the Orion, is going to be a ship that gets even better when you battle other players, because to me, that feels like a very important aspect of the game. I mean, like, look, it's a space war game at the end of the day, right? So, like, if you're not trying to do decently in war, what is the point? And I get that PvE is how you get there. I get that player versus environment is how you get there. And if you wanted, after your Orion is in a done state, to work on the Hercules, getting that from the campaign, or that is the Hercules in here, right? Right? Keep me honest. I got that right? No, it's the Nemesis. If you want to get the Nemesis, Okay, after you go and you finish the Orion, that's fine. You could go and do that. I'm not all that excited about the Nemesis as a flagship to go and get from there. The Nemesis is the one that like does a lot of extra flagship damage. This just doesn't hype me all that much. And it does give you a better repair ratio. And I get that there's value to this. And potentially with the addition of Nebula versus Nebula, my recommendation here could change. It's conceivable. But the flagship that I think is probably a better grab here is going to be the Atlas. Now, the reason I like the Atlas specifically to pair with the Orion is that the Orion is giving you a ton of very, very tanky stats. And although I can't prove it yet, I think that there is some amount of diminishing returns on having just an overload of the exact same type of stat. So it's got a ton of armor. It's got a ton of frigate armor. It's got more shields. It's got more shields again, and then navigate speed and hit points. I mean, it's just a very, very tanky flagship with not a lot of offensive punch. So I like going in on the Atlas pairing to give you some punch. You're going to get 24% attack. You're going to get some warship range, which means that, among other things, your ships will not be the first ones to get targeted, which is nice. You also are going to get even more attack when you're in longer running fights, which obviously happens when you get stacked up in a big fight. And as a free-to-play player, you probably are not looking to hunt individual fleets anyways. You're looking to effectively get into stacks or potentially to get some really opportunistic fights where you're likely to win by a lot anyways. And this wasn't going to matter all that much. You were going to win by a lot anyways, right? And then last but not least is just the benefit versus other players. When you're battling other commanders, you're going to get 42% more warship attack, and you're going to get 42% more armor. Again, I like the Atlas because it complements the Orion very well in terms of the stats that it's giving. I also think that like the two legendary ships paired together works really well. If you were going all in on like the Artemis and then the Titan, I think that's a great pair. So obviously the epic pairs I think are also going to be really, really great. And although not all of these skills are relevant versus PvE objectives, I still think it's a really solid place to be. Now, if there was one other flagship that I would recommend, it would be the Theseus as a secondary. And this would be a much more tanky pairing if you went with the Orion and the Theseus. But I don't love that because, as I said, I feel like there's a little bit of a diminishing returns there. I do think this is a great flagship, though. It's going to give you 36% of hit points. It's going to give you 36% armor and shields. It's going to give you attack versus other players, which is very important, 42%. Also, it's going to give you shields when you're battling other players. That's another 42%. And last but not least, 144% armor when you're above 70% strength, which means at the start of a fight, you're going to be really, really great. And toward the tail end, you're going to get weaker. And you want to refresh your fleet very, very frequently. Now, you may be wondering, okay, Chisgule, well, what about the Apollo? Like, this is a flagship that's designed for other players, right? And why not the flagship that we were just talking about moments ago, the Nemesis, right? Why not talk about some of these other flagships that we're avoiding? I think that's a fair ask. The reason I don't love the Apollo is that although bringing more warships is great, I actually think that's pretty fantastic. I really dislike this right over here. This is an ability that is making it so that you are extremely effective against the type of warship that you already restrain. What that means is that after you have defeated the equal typing of what you bring, so if you were bringing frigates, right, because we're talking about the Artemis or the Orion paired with the Apollo, the thing that I don't like is that your frigates have to beat the enemy frigates, and then and only then do you get the benefit of this skill where your frigates get a bonus versus other cruisers. It's a win more mechanic, and win more just doesn't excite me all that much. I'd rather get to the point where I'm winning rather than have a mechanic that helps me kind of win more after I've already won. The next skill is going to make it so that you get more, beneficial or more positive trades, having less units go and be sev wounded or be lost entirely, which, like, okay, I mean, I think that's good potentially in a server versus server game mode, but that doesn't exist yet. We don't know how that's going to even work. And unless your Nebula is in some kind of crazy fight, I find that unexciting relative to other options here. And the last skill here giving you warship attack and armor when you're above 70%, I think that's actually perfectly fine. I like conditional skills, and you then try to take advantage of the conditions so that you do better than average with the flagship. I think that's really good. The reason I'm not all that hyped about the Nemesis, even though you can get a lot of it from the campaign, is that, first of all, if you can get it from the campaign, I don't think you should be using your Federation credits on it, because just get it over time from the campaign, right? Like, use your Federation credits on something else that you can't get from the campaign. That's my opinion. But the Nemesis is going to make it so your flagship does more attack, and I have found that flagships don't do all that much damage in the first place. And second of all, and you could prove that, just go look at one of your reports and you'll see. But second of all, the other thing I don't like about advising a free-to-play player go in on flagships that get sort of boosted attack is that the weapons on your flagship, if you're free-to-play, are not likely to be all extremely high tier, like epics and legendary combinations of weapons. I think, and keep me honest in the comments, please, but I think that you are enhancing the damage that those weapons are dealing. So I just don't think that for a player who's free to play that this is exactly where you would want to be. But again, I'm open to alternatives here. This is again addressing the amount of warships that you have that would get restored to you, which could be very good in server versus server, but we don't know how that works yet. And there's just not that many game modes right now, unless you're own nebulas and some crazy fighting for a prolonged time, which it shouldn't be. Like, if your nebula can't get to a state of peace, you got big problems. So I just don't love that the Nemesis is a recommendation here. The warship range, I think, is perfectly fine. And then I think increasing your hit points is fine for your warships, but not for your flagship. I get that you're going to stay around longer, but I don't know. I find that the Nemesis is not going to be one of the flagships I would recommend, okay? So that covers what your other options would have been. The Titan, I think, is the best one. And then I'm not even talking about the Hercules, because this is a PvE-related flagship. When you're battling non-player units, to some extent, right? You might have considered this where, hey, like, I'm getting more armor. That seems fine. More shields, more hit points. Cool. I can have more warships present. But the problem is that there are two skills here for battling non-player units. If it was only one, I could have got on board with using the Hercules both for PvE and PvP, potentially for a free-to-play player. But because both of these skills, two of them over here, the fourth skill and also the second skill, are for battling non-player units, I get that this could be a cool project. Okay, the Hercules could be a cool project that over time you work on so you do well in PvE events, but I personally like to err on the side of being more war ready with a slight slant for PvE value, which is why I think the Atlas would be a better choice. So this is a little bit of a longer video than I actually intended for recommending a flagship pair, a single flagship pair where you really focus in a lot. And if you were to go in on this path, my recommendation is that you just focus on frigates all the way through and through. With your tech, focus on frigates. With your core module, with your crew, with your spaceport points, just really focus in on frigates and the damage type that you have, and you go all in on that plan. You overtrain on frigates. What's interesting about this game is that you don't actually have separate queues for the different warship types, so you can just make all frigates. Have a ton of frigates. Well, like, just specialize, and I think that's a really, really strong choice. And if you wanted to start to upgrade and expand into multiple fleets, which is a, like, very much down the road sort of a thing, and by that time you'll probably be able to sort of answer these questions for yourself, but, like, what legendary flagship would I recommend? I really like the Artemis. And then you've got the Artemis Orion pair. I personally am using that. I want to upgrade out of the Artemis Orion pair and into the Artemis Titan pairing, a double legendary pair, but that's going to take me a very long time to do, I think. Maybe a couple months before I'm like really, I don't know, maybe less, to be fully invested kind of in that path. But I think the first thing you do is you would get the Artemis and you pair it with the Orion. That would be your first upgrade. And then you would get some other flagship that you would pair with your Titan equivalent, that is the Atlas. Now, you've got a lot of choices there for what you would pair with the Atlas. I would assume it's potentially starting to diversify into another unit type. You do like the Radamanthus and also the Atlas, and I think that would be pretty reasonable. Or you could do, if you wanted, and it sort of spread into the Brontis, and you pair with the Atlas. I do want to say for a moment, though, that I think that generally the Theseus will be a better pair with both the Radamanthus and with the Brontis to sort of bring tankiness to the punch that those ships already have. But I've already gone kind of off the deep end, off of like way down the road after you've already maxed 2 epic flagships. What do you do next? I think those would be some sort of interesting projects and a long-term legendary tier project. I think the Artemis is pretty reasonable, and I think that going all in on frigates is not a bad choice. That is also true because a lot of players seem to go in on cruisers, and that was because at the start of this game, the way that things worked is like the frigates would all die, then the destroyers, then the cruisers, so everybody would just use cruisers to not have to take any damage at all in combat. And when the combat mechanics changed, most players did not actually switch to then be using a different warship type and different flagships. So you can really prey on a lot of those cruiser-heavy players by being all in on frigates. Again, a lot longer of a video than I intended. If you found it helpful, throw a like on here and consider subscribing. And until next time, you have fun smashing your nebula, and good luck building out your flagships as a free-to-play player.